I'm 85 years old. I have children who call and children who don't. I've had 31 years in this same kitchen chair in Dallas, Texas, to figure out exactly what separates the two, and it is nothing like what I expected. Not love, not good intentions, not effort, exactly. It's 5 things, specific, quiet, almost invisible things that adult children either do or slowly stop doing, that tell you everything about what kind of relationship you're actually in. Not the one you think you're in, the one that's actually there. If your child still does these 5 things, I want you to understand something before I'm done talking. You are holding something that most parents I have watched from this window will never get the chance to name. Most people don't recognize what they had until it's already gone. I want to change that. 1. They still call you not to check on you, to talk. From this window, I've watched a lot of families over the years. Watched the ones that held together and the ones that went quiet. And the difference between them almost without exception showed up first in the phone. I've come to believe that most families don't fall apart because of the big things, the affairs, the money disputes, the inheritance fights. Those things have names they're dramatic enough to explain. What quietly destroys most families is smaller than any of that. It's the slow withdrawal, the calls that stopped, the Sunday dinners that became occasional, the moment you realize your child is in your house but not really with you, and you don't know when exactly that happened. Small, invisible, compounding. I had a friend named Gerald Hawkins. We met at a Lions Club meeting in 1979 and stayed friends for better than 30 years. Gerald was a big man with a big laugh and 3 children he was prouder of than anything he owned. He used to pull out his wallet at the slightest provocation, not to show you his money, to show you the photographs. Not the school portraits, the casual ones, the ones where the kids didn't know the camera was on them. Gerald's oldest son was named Ray. Ray grew up, moved to Houston, got into real estate, built himself a life. By any reasonable measure, a successful man. But what Ray kept doing long after he had his own house, his own children, his own set of problems to manage was call his father every Sunday afternoon, not to run through a checklist. Not a welfare call. He'd call to tell Gerald about his week. Something funny at work. A movie he'd seen that his father would have hated. They'd argue about football for 20 minutes. One of them would say something that made the other laugh, and then they'd say goodbye. That went on for 30 years. I asked Gerald about it once around 2001, maybe 2002. I said, "Gerald, does Ray ever ask you for anything when he calls?" Gerald thought about it, genuinely considered it. Then he shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "He just calls." I nodded. I thought, well, that's what children do. It is not what most children do. I have watched families, good families, not bad people, where the phone only rings when something is wrong. The calls are efficient and kind and completely transactional. Alive? Yes. Taking your medication? Good. All right then. And the parent puts down the phone and sits back into the quiet. That is not the same thing as what Ray did, not even close. What I didn't understand until much later was what Ray was actually doing for his father. Not checking in, not fulfilling an obligation. He was treating Gerald as someone still worth consulting, still relevant to how Ray understood his own days. What Ray did was choose Gerald, not out of obligation, not because Sunday was written somewhere. He called because something happened on a Tuesday in Houston. By the time Sunday came, he still wanted to hear his father's reaction to it. I've thought about why this becomes rare. I want to say this carefully, because I'm not trying to blame anyone. A lot of us spent years teaching our children to be independent. Stand on your own 2 feet, don't need too much, figure it out yourself. And we were right to teach them that. That's part of the job. But somewhere in the teaching, Many of us sent a message we never meant to send. We taught them, without knowing it, that needing us was a weakness. That calling just to talk with no emergency, no agenda was something busy adults didn't do. And they hurt us. They took that lesson completely and never looked back. Gerald had a daughter, Sandra, who never once called him the way Ray did, not in 30 years. Gerald never mentioned it to me. Not once. In all our years of friendship. That's the part that stayed with me. The child who calls just to talk isn't looking for anything. They're not managing you, not checking a box, not fulfilling an obligation they carry around like a weight. They are choosing to have you in their day. At 85, I want you to understand what it feels like to be chosen by your adult child. Not needed, not obligated, chosen. There isn't a word that does it justice. If your child still calls you like that, treat it the way you'd treat something that could break. Because it can. 2-0. They remember the things you said, the small things, not the speeches. My granddaughter Claire teaches 4th grade down in Garland. She came to this table for Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and we were talking about her work, how she structures her lessons, how she reaches the children who struggle. She said, "Grandpa, I always remember something you told me once. You said a person who can explain something simply probably understands it better than the person who uses a lot of big words." I stared at her. I have no memory of saying that, none whatsoever. It was probably something I threw out at a dinner table 15 years ago without a second thought. But she'd been carrying it. She'd built something with it. She thought about it when she wrote her lesson plans. I had to look at the wall for a moment before I could answer her. I sat there thinking about that dinner 15 years ago. I can't even picture the occasion it must have been, and wondered how many other things I'd said at how many other tables that I'd already forgotten and someone was still carrying. That is a particular kind of vertigo once you start thinking about it. I want to say something honest here. When Claire told me that, I found myself asking whether I'd actually listened to my own children the way I was sitting there feeling moved that she'd listened to me. Whether I had carried their passing words, whether I'd brought things back, months later, the way Derek brought things back to Miriam. The answer wasn't comfortable. Most of us are better at being heard than at hearing. I knew a woman on this street. Her name was Miriam Tate, 2 houses east of here. She raised 4 children and worked as a school secretary for 30 years. Knew every child in this neighborhood by name. 3 of her children turned out more successful than the 4th by the usual measures. The 4th was a son named Derek who worked for a plumbing company his whole adult life. Never made much. Never went anywhere particularly notable. Derek was the one who remembered. Anything Miriam mentioned in passing, a book she'd half read once, something her own mother used to say, a song she'd heard at a cousin's wedding in 1964. Derek would bring it back. Not immediately, months later, sometimes a year later. He called Miriam once, this was around 2007, and said, "Mama, I was driving home from a job out in Plano. I heard that song on the radio. The one you mentioned, from Cousin Betty's wedding. I was thinking about you the whole drive home." Miriam told me that story herself, sitting on her front porch one August evening. She said, "Thomas, 3 of my children have more than Derek will ever have. But that boy has never once in his life let me feel like I wasn't heard." She wasn't comparing her children to each other. She was noticing something the way you finally notice a sound in a house you've been hearing for years without naming. There is a particular kind of attention that some people have and some people don't. It's not about intelligence. It's not about trying harder. It's about whether they are actually inside the conversation with you, or whether part of them is already somewhere else. Derek's siblings sent flowers on Mother's Day. Derek called about the song. I don't think one kind of child is better than the other in every way. I think they carry different things home, And what the parent feels in the quiet after the call is a different weight. Being remembered isn't the same as being important to someone. Being remembered means they were still thinking about you when you weren't in the room. The children who remember the small things were listening in a way most people never learn. The passing comment at a Tuesday dinner in 1998. The offhand observation made while washing the dishes. What I didn't know until Claire looked at me over that Thanksgiving table. There were things my own children had been carrying that I'd never asked about. Things they'd taken from me or decided about me in rooms I didn't know I'd been in. Miriam knew what she had in Derek. She just didn't have a word for it. Make of that what you will. 3. They still ask your opinion even when they've already made up their mind. This one I want to say carefully, because I've watched people misread it, and misreading it costs you something real. This is not about children who need permission. This is not about adult children who haven't learned to make their own decisions. What I'm describing is something far more specific and far more valuable. My son-in-law James, Margaret's daughter's husband, built his own landscaping business over 20 years. Good man, capable, made his own decisions every day without needing anyone's counsel. But he used to call Margaret whenever something was weighing on him. A contract decision, whether to expand the crew, whether to pull his oldest boy from a school that wasn't doing right by him. He'd call her up, walk her through the situation, and ask what she thought. He didn't always do what she said. He usually had an answer forming before he finished dialing, but he wanted to know how she saw the world. Margaret told me once, "James doesn't always follow what I say, but he always wants to know what I think." That sentence sat with me for 20 years before I understood what she'd given me. I've turned it over many times since. James wasn't calling Margaret because he needed her wisdom. He was calling because he needed her inside the question with him. That is a different thing entirely. It took me an embarrassingly long time to understand the distinction. Most of the advice I gave my own children over the years, I gave it like I was handing something down, like I was already past the question, like my job was to be the answer, not to sit alongside the problem. That's harder to admit than I'd like. There was a man on my street, quiet man, city worker, 3 decades with the water department. His name was Curtis Webb. His youngest daughter, Anita, used to call him about her decisions. She was in her mid-40s, had her own household, ran her own affairs, but she'd call Curtis and say, "Daddy, walk me through this." I happened to be on Curtis's porch one afternoon when he took one of those calls. I watched him listen for a long time, nodding. Then he said, "Anita, what does the new job offer that the old one doesn't?" She told him. I could hear her voice, but not the words. He said, "Then go." Just that, then go. Anita went. The next time I saw Curtis, I asked if she'd taken the position. He nodded. Started Monday. I asked if she usually followed his advice. Curtis smiled, slow, about half the time. But she always wants to know what her father thinks before she decides. That is not a small thing, Thomas. He was right. I didn't fully know it then. Here's what I've worked out in the years since. When an adult child stops asking, and this happens gradually, you barely notice it while it's happening. It usually isn't because they've gotten wiser. It's because at some point, in some specific interaction, they got the message that asking wasn't worth the cost, that your answer would come packaged with a lecture, or a dismissal, or an "I told you so" they'd have to carry home. The children who keep asking are the ones who found, consistently, that you could hold their problem without making it about you. If your adult child still brings you their thinking even when they've already decided, even when they're really just asking you to be in the room with the question, they're saying something they may never say out loud. Your voice still lives in my head. What 85 years has put clearly, the parent who holds their child's uncertainty without needing to be proven right, stays invited into the room. The one who turns every question into a referendum on who was smarter gets invited fewer and fewer times. And one day the invitations stop. You won't quite know when or why. I have not found a finer thing a person can say to a parent without saying it. I want to be honest with you about something. I didn't learn this one gracefully. I learned it from the wrong end first, and I've spent years figuring out what to do with what I found out. For most of 2009, I would have told you I knew how my family saw me. I had a picture of it, the usual one, a man builds up over decades without examining it too closely. That year I was going through a health scare. Nothing catastrophic in the end, but at the time, we didn't know that. There was a lot of hushed discussion in the family about what things might look like going forward. And through a mutual acquaintance, someone who didn't understand what they were telling me, I began to hear things. My middle son Richard had been saying things at gatherings I wasn't part of. Not recently, for years. That I had always been difficult. That I'd been the source of most of the friction in this family for 30 years. I am going to leave out what I felt when I heard that. This is not that kind of story. What I will tell you is that I sat here in this kitchen, in this chair, and went back through 30 years of my own behavior. I tried to be honest about what I found. That is the thing nobody warns you about when you hear something like that. You don't immediately defend yourself, not if you're being honest. You go looking, and I found things I didn't like. I had not always been easy. I had opinions that came out too strong at moments when a quieter man would have let things go. I had to sit with all of that, and I did. For a long time, and the person I thought I was in some ways, I had been wrong about that too. Not entirely, but enough. 6 months later, I was on the phone with my daughter Patricia. She had no idea what I knew. She mentioned offhand that she'd been at a cookout where someone had made a critical remark about me, a decision I'd made years ago, and I asked her, "What did you say?" She was quiet for just a moment. Then she said, "I told them they didn't know you." That was it. 4 words. They didn't know you. I looked at the wall of this kitchen for a long time after I set down that phone. Patricia didn't know what those 4 words meant to me. She was just telling me a small thing that happened at a cookout. She wasn't building a case. She wasn't positioning herself as the loyal child. She was just telling me about her afternoon. But those words landed in a place I didn't know was hollow until they found it. We talk a lot about whether our children love us. We track the visits, the calls, the holidays, the occasions. But we almost never ask, because we almost never have a way to ask what our children say about us when we're not in the room. What name do they give us at a dinner table where we're not sitting? You almost never find out. And most parents, I suspect, are grateful for that. Patricia never told me the other times she'd defended me. That's how I know those times were real. She wasn't reporting to me. She wasn't keeping score. She was just, quietly and without expectation of credit, the same person in my absence that she was in my presence. You cannot teach that. You cannot negotiate for it. It's either part of who they became or it isn't. Richard came for Christmas. We sat at this table and talked around the edges of the things we should probably say to each other. Maybe that's what the rest of our time together looks like. I've made a kind of peace with it. Not the peace that feels like resolution, the other kind, the kind that means you've stopped fighting what is. But I know who Patricia is when I'm not in the room. I believed, for most of my adult life, that I knew what real time with your children looked like. I had a clear picture of it. The Thanksgiving table, the 4th of July backyard, the occasions you could put on a calendar. I was measuring the wrong things. I didn't know that until I couldn't anymore. What I know now, sitting here at 85, is that the most important time you will ever spend with your adult child isn't the time when something happens. It is the time when nothing happens. Just the two of you, the same room, no occasion, no agenda. Let me tell you about Margaret. My wife passed in 2019, after 53 years. She was the kind of woman people could spend a whole afternoon with and not notice where the time went. Not because she was entertaining, she wasn't, not in the performance sense, because she was present, genuinely, completely present, in a way that is harder than it sounds. When you were with Margaret, you felt that there was nowhere else on this earth she needed to be, that you were the whole destination. She never said a word about it. You simply felt it. Our youngest daughter, Evelyn Evie, we call her, has that quality. I don't know how she got it. I like to think Margaret passed it to her in some way that doesn't show up in any document. After Margaret passed, Evie started coming over on Sunday afternoons. Not to help me with things, not to check the refrigerator or go through the mail. She'd come in, take her coat off, sit down in the chair right across from mine right there, where she's been sitting since she was 9 years old, and she'd just be here. Sometimes we'd talk about real things. Sometimes we'd sit for 20-25 minutes without either of us saying a word. Once she brought a book she was reading and sat here reading it while I had the game on. Two people in the same room going about their own quiet business. Somehow that was exactly enough. I said to her, "Evie, you don't have to drive all the way over here just to sit." She looked up from her book. She said, "I'm not babysitting you, Daddy. I just like being here." I had to look at the television for a good long while after that. It wasn't until later, after she'd left and I was back in this chair with the afternoon quiet settling in around me, that I understood something about that visit I couldn't have understood at 40 or even 60. The reason that kind of presence is rare isn't because people are cold. It isn't because adult children don't care. Sitting with someone truly sitting, without an exit, without something to fix, requires you to be completely available. Not managing, not performing, just there. And that is one of the hardest things a person can be asked to do in a world that never stops telling you to produce something. I have known so many families where the visits feel like performances. The adult children arrive and they are kind and efficient. They make sure the important things are in order. They stay for exactly the amount of time that feels appropriate. Then they leave. The parent settles back into the quiet. And the quiet is exactly the same weight as before they came, maybe slightly heavier in its echo. I don't blame those children. I'm not certain I taught my own any differently. But here is what 85 years has finally put the right words to. The most human thing one person can offer another is the willingness to be somewhere with no agenda. Not to fix, not to prove, not to manage or perform or check a box. Just to be in the room and let the other person feel by your stillness, I am not going anywhere. I don't need this to be anything other than what it is. Most people go their whole lives without receiving that. Most people go their whole lives without knowing how to give it. Evie came by this past Sunday. She stayed nearly 3 hours. We watched a little of the game. She told me about something at work, nothing serious. She just wanted to talk it through. We had coffee. She washed the 2 cups before she left, the way Margaret always did, the small